I'm a corporate security officer. At my client site, there are 3 posts that are manned 24/7 and all non-supervisor officers work both weekend days. Each shift has its own supervisor. The 3 posts include 2 desks, one at the main building in the compound and one at the secondary building, Building 1 and Building 2 for short, and a roving officer that's based at Building 1 and completes the patrols and mans the desk when another officer takes their break. The duties are usually broken up between the officers, so the roving officer is not the same person for the entire night. On third shift, my shift, breaks are taken in a full hour block. 3RED shift runs midnight to 0800 and most night officers prefer having their break after 0400. Once upon a time, it was possible for all 3 officers to do this, but not anymore, because of Rupert. I'll sum up Rupert to you all the same way I summed him up to my supervisor. He's a blue falcon. He can't stop telling people about how he was a Marine, join the club, this account is only hiring veterans and former cops, how things were done when he was in my. He is noteworthy for being the first my I've ever met that I didn't like or respect, and he will talk for 20 minutes straight without you saying word and then cut you off if you open your mouth. He wants desperately to be in charge and will jump the chain of command if he doesn't get his way. He once reported me to the account manager, above the supervisors, because I took an hour and a half break on a 12-hour shift, which is something that our supervisor specifically authorized us to do. When my supervisor talked to me about it, he didn't write me up, didn't even give me a verbal warning, he just told me to take my breaks off camera. Not only will Rupert spy on and report his co-workers for the prettiest shit, he smokes during his shift, which is explicitly against company policy, and will bitch and moan if he doesn't get a smoke break whenever he wants one. I have suspicions that he smokes weed during his shift, during which he carries a fucking firearm, but I can't be absolutely sure as he uses his personal vehicle for exterior patrols and he might just be hotboxing in it in his free time. He took extra work at our city courthouse, and he would talk macho about breaking protesters' arms. We have an active bolo on an individual, a former security officer that is making threats via phone and email against the site, and this walking detriment all but stated his intention to another officer to shoot the individual on site if he found him on property. Remember when I said supervisors didn't work weekends? Well, on Saturday and Sunday, officers had freedom to run the shifts how they saw fit as long as everything got done and was agreed on among the officers and patrols were spread out enough to not be ineffective, i.e. not one officer doing a patrol and then immediately retracing their steps. This was the once upon a time I mentioned where it was possible for all 3 officers to have their breaks after 0400. Enter Rupert. Rupert wants things to be done his way. He all constantly ask what the plan is for tonight as if it ever really changes. I've replied try to take over the world more than once, but never got the full reference out before he cut me off. When you try to tell him what the plan is, he all go on about how he's fine with whatever as long as he knows what's going on, will tell you what he wants to do, and if you let him, steer you into that direction to the best of his ability. This would waste up to 30 minutes at the beginning of the shift, so it got to the point where I would leave on a patrol immediately if I was at Building 1 with him. Rupert was particularly upset one day that after I relieved the second shift officer at Building 2, that officer stuck around and talked for a while. The roving officer came over and talked as well. He later complained to everyone that would listen that having 3 officers at one desk wasn't proper security, although it was a hell of a lot better than the normal one, especially since that desk was the primary entry point for the building. I'm entirely sure he was just pissed because we didn't invite them, even though the second shift officer called over to the other building and asked him where he was stationed in the Marines since we were looking at our duty stations on Google Maps. Eventually, when another officer did some back-to-back patrols that were less than necessary, he sent an email, once again jumping the chain of command, and our supervisor was compelled to put us on a set weekend schedule to extinguish any contention over the order our tasks would be done in. We were also instructed that there weren't to be 2 officers at either desk for longer than 30 minutes at a time and officers weren't to come in earlier or stay later than 30 minutes after being relieved. If we had extra time, we were to use it conducting exterior patrols. I was very happy to hear this, because it meant that, 1. I had everything I needed in writing to avoid Rupert for the majority of a shift, 2. There was no longer any question about what the right way to run a shift was, and 3. I knew Rupert would not adhere to these rules at all because they weren't his rules. Our schedule ran like this: exterior patrol building 1 patrol building 2 patrol building 2 patrol / building 2 officer break / exterior patrol / unlocking 2 gates restricting access to property. This had to be done no later than 0500, building 1 patrol / building 1 officer break / roving officer break. We could do these in any order. / our supervisor specifically authorized us to do the building 2 patrols back to back in order to push back building 2 officers break. Now something needs to be noted here: Rupert abhors back-to-back patrols for any reason, even if it's 2 different officers, who do patrols their own individual ways. When it comes to doing back-to-back patrols, there's some merit to the idea that they're not good for security or safety purposes. However, it's entirely possible for an electrical panel to start sparking 30 seconds after the officer leaves the room, or for someone to attempt a break-in as soon as they see the officer leave the area. Therefore, in my opinion, back-to-back patrols don't pose more a risk than distributed patrols as long as both patrols are done thoroughly, and having two different officers do the patrols changes the perspective enough that they will find things the other may have overlooked. All this to say, Rupert's unusual hatred of back-to-back patrols was unfounded, and back-to-back patrols are acceptable if there's a decent reason to do them that way. My supervisor evidently agreed with this sentiment, hence authorizing us to do back-to-back patrols at Building 2 in order to allow the officer there a later break. One Sunday, my Friday, morning, it all came to a head. I was at the desk at Building 2. Typically, the roving officer would come over and do the patrol first, then the desk officer would do the other patrol and take their break in order to limit the amount of times the officers need to log in and out of the computer. This evening, Rupert arrived at Building 2 at least 30 minutes, generously, later than the roving officer usually does. He'd spent the first /25 minutes talking at the other desk officer, surprising me not at all. He tells me he's going to take a walk around the building and check the doors, then start the patrol of the interior. All except one door in the building is checked during the regular patrol, so this wasn't necessary as the route goes by that one door, so it's checked as we pass it. It's also noteworthy that since he was just walking around one of the buildings, this didn't constitute an exterior patrol either. He returned and told me he could take his break then so that I didn't have to take my break so early. I declined because this would have been going off schedule and I did an extra exterior patrol instead. Even with Rupert's delay, we were still on schedule to finish with spare time. When I returned from the patrol, Rupert questioned why I had done the patrol. He said it was a waste of time since he had just done one. He hadn't. There are 3 parking lots and another building I had to walk around because he brought over his own car instead of the security vehicle so he could smoke on his way over. I tried to tell him that the roving officer can't take their break that early because of the schedule and, of course, he cut me off. It was about this time that I realized the patrol keys weren't hanging on their hook, so I asked him if he had them. He responded by dropping them on the desk. I was standing 2 feet from him and he was facing me before digging the keys out of his pocket. I picked them up with a typical thank you and went to do the second patrol. I ended the patrol back at the desk, hung up the keys, and said see you in an hour as I usually do. No reply. I know the silent treatment when I see it. I'm not used to getting it from a grown-ass man twice my age, though. This was the unmistakable demeanor of a Rupert that was about to write an email and see God himself. I resolved on my break to write an email of my own. I returned from my break to utter silence. I said nothing. I was awash in the bliss of the fact that this man had finally shut the fuck up. He logged off and left without so much as a backward glance. This was at about 0440, not more than 10 minutes later than the roving officer usually leaves Building 2. My email was simple. I stated that I had witnessed a pattern of behavior in another officer and was writing the email to document the events of the night from my perspective in the event that my suspicions of an imminent complaint were correct. I outlined the events of the shift, including an objective description of Rupert's attitude. Also included were the times the tasks were started and completed, clearly and subtly stating that the Building 2 tasks were completed around the same time they usually were, despite starting a half-hour later than usual, and if there was any kind of issue with running out of time for the other tasks, it was not a result of anything that happened at Building 2. I included my reasoning for doing the exterior patrol instead of having Rupert take his break and cited recent directives by both my supervisor and the account manager. I didn't identify Rupert in any way. Anyone reading the email would have no trouble figuring out who it was anyway. The best part is, I never even sent the email. I wrote it as a contingency and left it in my drafts over my weekend. Rupert worked the next day, so he would have been in a position to complain immediately to our supervisor, whereas I'd be back Wednesday morning. The last thing I wanted to do was to start problems where there weren't any. So on the off chance that I misread the situation and he wasn't actually going to complain, I sat on the email until I came back. As such, Rupert being transferred to second shift happened without me having to lift a finger. I came in Wednesday and checked the schedule to find an opening on third and a Rupert on second. My supervisor, now the only other officer on third shift, didn't say a word to me about it. There were repercussions. When the second shift supervisor came in at noon to relieve me from a 12-hour shift, looked me in the eyes and said frankly, "What did you do?" I answered that I just worked the shift the same damn way I always do, 100% true, and Rupert did the rest. She wasn't happy that she was now saddled with him, so I just told her that I got him off third shift, now it was up to her to get him the rest of the way out the door. A couple days later, he called off for his first 3 shifts on second shift. I don't know if that's a sign or not. He's due back later today, so I'll have to wait and see. 2. Guy throws his co-workers under the bus multiple times, causes us to be put on a schedule, and has a tantrum when I insist on working by that schedule, then finally leaves me the hell alone.